Alrighty. So today's discussion is not a very fancy one, but it's just a couple of images in order to talk about this concept of negative space. And so when we're talking about negative, it begs the question of what is the positive? So for the sake of right now, typically in any composition like this still life setup that you've seen before, most people are going to say that the positive space are the objects. So certainly the candle and its stick, the onion, the lovely bottle of 1970 Chateau Lafite Rothschild. So these are the positive spaces or areas or shapes. And the negative space is the stuff that surrounds the positive. So it's the space in between here, the space around here, here, here. All of these areas are negative space. It can also be the area that's in between an object and just another shape, like this shadow right here. So when we say positive, we don't necessarily mean exclusively three-dimensional tangible objects. We're really talking about any two or more visual elements, and a shape is, this is a visual element. This is a shape in this picture, which can be drawn, right? So the positive space is anything that we're comparing the negative space, what the space that is in between those objects. There you go. So positive in this case can be maybe this candle and a stick and the bottle, and the negative space is this area in between. But we can be talking about the positive areas being the dark shadow here, even the top of the onion and this candlestick and holder, because we are interested in the shape of the space that is in between or surrounding these objects. And sometimes when we're talking about negative space, I mean, it's easy to visualize it because this is really interesting, interesting shapes and interesting, easy to visualize areas right here between really sharp, hard edges like that. But negative space exists on the outside of forms too. I mean, look at the curve that's at the top of this candle, this kind of sideways S curve right there. Imagine that you have used your sighting skills to place a imaginary line there or across the top or down the sides to allow you to see the shape of the curve that is right outside of the edge of the candle, or the shape of this little dip right here. You can use sighting tools to see spaces that maybe don't have borders on all sides. They only have borders on one side or partially. And what's the use of something like this? Well, I tell you, it has to do with your psychology. It has to do with the fact that your left brain is really oriented towards wanting to pay attention to the objects. But sometimes it can get confused, and it can confuse your right brain a little teeny bit about what kind of shape the object really has. Well, part of the way that you can check the shape of the object is to check the shape of everything that surrounds it, the negative space. And think in terms of like the yin yang symbol, right? The black and the white there, one element and the other element, they completely balance each other. In this case, they are, they're very, very symmetrical. But if one of those shapes was wrong, the other one would be wrong as well. So, and you'll see how this works as we talk about it a little bit more. If you can visualize the shapes that are around something and check that those shapes are correct, I mean, this is a complex form right here. And there's all kinds of interesting space in the middle. I've got another one here too. No, I don't. There's another one. Notice how we'll click back and forth between these. So this is a view from a little bit higher, and you can see you can look down into the candle right here. And then when we click there and back and forth, these different views. So looking at negative space and the way it changes is really valuable in helping you to, one, return back to your same drawing position, because you can compare your drawing to the setup. And if your drawing is accurate, you can get back in the position where it matches your setup. And then you're back in the good place, the good spot again. That's how I figure it out. And also it helps you just to make sure that you get the shapes of all this stuff correct. Because if all of these shapes in here are correct in your drawing and they match what you see when you're looking at your setup, well, there's a really, really good chance that it means that at least this side of the bottle and at least this side of the candle are drawn correctly. The right proportions, spacings, size, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. So it's not like it's sort of a throwaway skill or I don't know, something that, oh, it's kind of cute or whatever. No, it's something that you use a lot and it's really valuable. And I'll tell you one more reason why. Your left brain loves to substitute a symbol for something. Think about, it's a totally simplistic explanation, but when you ask a little kid perhaps to draw a hand, or even an adult to draw a hand, what do they normally do? Do they really start thinking about how to draw, what fingers look like? What position is it in? No. Your left brain leaps in and says, I've got a symbol for a hand, right? Circle, slash, 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 and another one out here for the thumb. That's, the left brain loves stuff like that, substituting symbols for things. So it will just try to shortcut the process where the right brain is over there quietly screaming, saying, but I see the actual shapes. I want to draw it the way it appears to me through my eyes and my brain. We need to short circuit the left brain and get the left brain to bug out so that the right brain can get in here and see what these areas and these shapes look like, actually measure these spaces, use sighting and alignments and all the tools bounce back and forth between drawing and your setup in order to get these shapes correct. If this shape is correct, well then this edge is in the right place, which means that this object is going to be correct, and vice versa, and all the way through. Makes sense, right? I hope. Okay, let's look at some more examples. So here we go. So it's a picture of a chair, right? Except in this drawing, there aren't any pencil marks inside the positive area or the positive space. The chair is just this ghost-like silhouette. And what the artist has done here is measured the spaces that surround and the spaces that are in between and in between. I mean, think about these chair legs. You're going to measure the distance from here to here, and then you're going to measure the distance from here to here and from here to here. And these distances need to be correct for it to line up with all these other things and this other negative space and the area that's out here and the area that's out here in order for the chair to not be lopsided or wonky or something. All of those spaces, the negative spaces, they have to be right for the positive to be right. And sometimes if your left brain is sneaking in there and is trying to confuse you and not let you see all these angles and spaces and how high or low some of this stuff is, drawing the shape of the negative space, even when it doesn't have a border on one side, or even if it doesn't have a border on two sides or three sides or four sides almost, you can substitute those borders and you can see the spaces that surround objects like the chair. And that is going to help you to capture the form, the proportions, the size of the chair as a whole and all of its component parts. So there you go. Really useful to look at negative space when you are drawing something that is complex, maybe involves anatomy, This, philodendron leaf is a perfect subject for a negative space drawing. In fact, I even made a project out of it, which I'll show you in a minute, that used for Art 100 classes. But the shape of the leaf, very organic and very lovely, but there's all kinds of complex spacings and things in here. And these spacings and even the shapes out here in the corners and whatnot, they're all kind of distinctive. They have measurements, they have alignments, they have shape to them. And just as much as it's important to sort of look at the shapes of the positive and draw that, you need to know how far apart they are and what the character of the space is in order to make sure that they're all located in the right spot relative to each other. Well, you can look at a space like this. This is a negative, a negative space shape. And just like you try to get this shape right, you get this shape right, then you get this shape and this shape. And if you get all the shapes right, then everything is perfect, right? So negative space is really, really valuable tool to help you to understand what the positive is going to look like. Because, let's face it, this is a picture, not of the space around, but it's a picture of the philodendron leaf. But the negative space has to be right for the positive to be right. Okay, a little bit more. This is kind of a breakdown of various aspects, various ways of looking at negative space. So obviously on the left, let's see if we can make it a little bigger. On the left, we've got this picture of this nice little cane bottom chair. And look at all the interesting negative spaces through there. Whoo! I guarantee if you were to try to just sit down and draw this right now, your left brain would be using a crowbar to try to get in on the process. It would be just yelling and screaming like, let me do this, let me do this. I've got a simple version for this chair because I get it, right? And I guarantee the left brain is going to screw it up. It's going to make a mess out of this process. Whereas the right brain doesn't even need to know it's a chair. The word, chair, language, that's all stuff that exists in the left brain. The right brain just looks at shapes and forms and it draws what it sees. And then the left brain sees the drawing that the right brain made and it says, cool, a chair, right? Teach the left brain its place and life will be better for you. All right, so if you had to deal with this chair, well, here is the blacked out version that shows the positive space in black and the negative space in white. Are we getting the yin yang thing here, right? Here is the opposite. It's just space. It's just space that has been allocated to black or to white. So this is the reverse of that right here. And this finally is taken away all of the exterior areas around the chair and only showing you the raw negative space shapes that are on the interior, the areas where you are perforating and looking through the chair legs and the braces and all that sort of stuff. They make these really, really distinct shapes, these geometric shapes, triangles and, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a pentagonal or semi-pentagonal form here. There's rhomboid or trapezoidal forms, some complex shapes like that. And when you start to look at these shapes in a more, I say abstract, I don't mean like, oh, just loosey-goosey, whatever you want, but you start to look at them for precisely what they are. They're just geometric shapes. See the shapes that are there, copy the shapes. Oh my God, you're drawing the chair the way it actually looks because you're drawing the shapes that you see. Notice too, some of these shapes here are made out of elements that in real space don't touch each other. This bar right here, it doesn't touch that bar there. It doesn't touch this leg here. It touches that leg and it touches, well, that leg, but it crosses over these other things and it produces shapes in between them and around them. Well, visually, that's what it looks like when you look at the actual chair with your one eye closed from your drawing position. And When you put your drawing on the piece of paper, surprise, the piece of paper is flat, right? It's not three-dimensional. It's an illusion of three-dimensional space. So it is going to be touching on the paper because the paper and the drawing isn't real. It's trickery. You are a magician. So if you can see these shapes, put the shapes on the paper, that is going to give you a real advantage towards capturing the actual look of the shapes of the chair. And then boom, you're a genius, right? Makes sense so far, I hope? Okay. Let's see, what do we got to do now? Another version of this chair concept. This is standard art school stuff. I don't actually usually spend the time to do something like this, but if we're in class, it's really easy. When we're at school, we can take chairs and stools and things like that, even easels, set up easels and draw the easels. It's great, this kind of stuff. Step ladders work great. If you have a peace bamboo plant around, or a philodendron or something like that, it works really great to visualize negative space and work on these concepts. But you see how each one of these shapes is very, very distinct and different from each other. They're related because they kind of share an edge that lines up here, but on this other side, the edge is curving. And this one is longer and skinnier, and this one is wider than this one. And this one kind of becomes boxier, except look, it's got this curve that comes down here and the curve right here. So the left brain is going to see these four things, and it's going to try to standardize them and use the same shape for each one. It can't be. It's going to make the drawing look crummy. The left brain is going to want to have all of these legs kind of like all coming down to lie down flat on the floor. Well, if your eye was on the floor, then they would be on a straight line. But if you're above the chair looking down, this one is closest to you, it looks lower. This one is next closest, it looks the next up. This one is pretty close, but a little bit higher, right? You can see that by putting an imaginary line across. And the one that's furthest away is higher still. And the spaces that are in between, this little teeny dagger right here, and these little teeny shapes that you can see, if all of this stuff in the positive image lines up right, then these spaces will appear in your drawing just like you could look at them and see. So it's a way to either help drive the shapes that you're drawing or to double check. Negative space is super, super valuable stuff. Okay. And then remember I showed you that split leaf philodendron picture. Well, in the past, I've done, especially for Art 100 classes, this negative space project in which we cut out bits from magazines or other things, and we fill them into the negative space so that the positive area doesn't have any information in it whatsoever. It is just a silhouette, and there's not even a distinction between, this is the stem coming up right here. See, there's no distinction between what part is the stem and what part is the leaf. There's just, nothing there. It's just the white of the paper showing through, because we've made the shape of the leaf entirely by concentrating on the negative space shapes and where they're located, how far they're located from each other, sort of what their orientation is, how tall they are, how wide they are, what the shape of the curve is like, all that sort of stuff. So there you go. This is a really, I think, a valuable explanation, and it's kind of artsy fartsy too, because all of the magazine clippings are cut out of an art magazine, and they're advertisements for museum shows and stuff like that. So tricky adding content to the work. But you can see that negative space, it provides really, really strong indications for, well, where the positive space is located, because the positive and the negative, they're locked together. They can't be separated. And looking at the negative space is such a valuable way of making sure you get the positives right. And then everyone looks and they say, oh man, this candle drawing, this candlestick and onion and bottle drawing you did is so cool. They're not going to say like, man, the negative space in this drawing is so bitchin', right? They're not going to do that. They're going to talk about the objects. But how did you get the objects to look right? Well, you looked at the negative space and you use that to your advantage. So it's just one more tool that you have in your kit. And I want you to start to think about that, because as some of the subject matter that we draw becomes a little bit more complex, our discussions will include negative space, and you just need to understand what it is and use it to help to become more and more accurate. And there you have it. Okay, so let's turn off our recording here. Excellent.